on behalf of some of our finance staff who are simultaneously trying to put together some of the budget prep data. So considerable work going into this. And as we get into the questions, I may call upon the Commissioner to assist with some of those questions. So just by way of starting out in terms of an overview, I'm going to walk through each of these pieces in more detail. I'll start with some context. This will be a bit of a preamble, maybe a bit repetitious, but you'll also hear some of this in the next week or two with respect to the development of the 2018 budget. And then going to do a bit of an overview of the components of compensation and some of the cost elements, just so that we're all talking the same lingo. And then we'll dive into the two respective pieces of protective services, starting with police. We'll talk a little bit about the contract history, wage increases, some comparators, and some projections based on some assumptions around compensation changes in the future. And then we'll do the same thing for fire, and we'll end with some observations and recommendations. We'll start with the context. We are right now starting to develop, as you know, we've been in some meetings with Finance Committee. That will move into a special session next Monday with full council to discuss the draft for the 2018 budget. In terms of our price point, we've been using this slide a little bit lately to keep people reminded of the relative costs of residency in the city of St. John. We sit with the unique distinction of the highest tax rate, property tax rate, amongst the three large cities, and comparing to the surrounding communities of, particularly in the Valley, our tax rate sits at 50 to 55 cents per hundred higher. It's a similar story on the water and sewer rates. This would reflect the 2017 rate at $12.96 later this evening. You'll be looking at the third reading to raise the water rate for 2018, and we anticipate the need for additional increases for 2019, all in support of the Safe Clean Drinking Water project. And again, in comparison to the two large cities, that will put us in a position of $400 to $500 per year higher, and similarly to the communities surrounding. So suffice to say, we don't have a lot of room in terms of raising our revenues by virtue of raising the tax rates. To put it in another form, we've also done some affordability measures. And this slide shows the median household income in the community compared to those same communities on the previous slide. So the two communities in the Valley enjoy considerably higher median household incomes, and as well in the two larger cities, they're higher. We did a little modeling here with the average home at $170,000 in St. John would attract a tax burden of over $3,000. As a percentage of income, median income, that's 6%, and I'll remind Council this is of the gross income before deductions. And then when you add on the water bill, it's 8% of the gross. And if you look in the Valley again, you're talking about less than half of that in terms of burden, and lower percentages in Fredericton and Moncton as well. At the same time, so for the census period of 2011 to 2016, St. John now finds itself as no longer either the largest population nor the largest tax base of the three major cities in New Brunswick. And from that period, we had a decline of population in St. John of roughly 2,500 residents, or 3.7%, while at the same time Moncton and Fredericton enjoyed growth rates between 3.5% and 4%. This slide shows the decline in the average annual revenue, and you can see distinct periods here on this particular chart. That period up to the 2012 when St. John was enjoying growth year over year of tax base and provincial grant of between 3 and 7%, fairly predictably. Since 2012, however, that growth rate has dropped off. In 2013, we were at 2.5%. Since then, it's been less than 1% on average. And 2018, we're actually projecting our revenue to decline year over year for the first time. And so we find ourselves in a bit of a predicament in terms of affordability on all fronts, and obviously a very challenging period and a challenging budget coming up. Similar pattern developing here. You can see on the left side the infrastructure deficit for St. John, $434 million. That's defined as the value of the assets, the infrastructure assets, that have currently reached the end of their useful life. And so when we compare again to Fredericton and Moncton, we're considerably higher on that infrastructure deficit. And on our overall debt, this would be as of the end of last year, St. John it's sitting at $205 million compared to Moncton and Fredericton at considerably lower. And of course, we have already approved the increased borrowing to support the Safe Clean Drinking Water project, which is likely to happen before the end of this calendar year, which will add another nearly $50 million to that debt. So we'll be approaching $250 million in total debenture balances before the end of this calendar year. A little breakdown on the operating budget. This doesn't tell you a whole lot. The various service areas are shown here in the color codes. The largest single service area is Transportation and Environment Services at over a quarter of the overall budget. Protective Services on the right-hand side, Fire and Rescue Suppression Service, 14%, Police at 16%, and other public safety services at 4%. Total public safety services, if you combine all of that, is 34%. Where it becomes a little more interesting is when you look at transportation and some of the larger ones, when you only look at the salaries and benefits, fire and EMO represent 28% of the total salary and benefits of the total establishment of the city, and police and the 911 center represent 30% of the salaries and benefits. Transportation drops down to 21%. Combined, fire, EMO, police, and 911, wages and benefits represent 58% of the total salary and benefits of the establishment. So I thought it would be worthwhile revisiting what we mean by compensation, because there's been a fair amount of discussion about this. Obviously, the main component in compensation is salary and or hourly wages, but it also includes additional components, and we'll just expand upon that a little bit. The benefit package that applies to public safety professions is 29% overall of the salary. The first line item there is lion's share, which is the pension plan at 15.2%. There are considerable other benefits that go along with the compensation that totals up to the 29%. I won't go through all of those. You can read those. I will point out, however, that shared risk pension plan payment is independent of the special pension payment that is made on behalf of employees, which was designed in 2013, I guess, or initiated in 2013 to cover all employees, not only public safety employees, but all employees within the St. John establishment, in order to cover the unfunded gap of funding for the defined benefit plan that was replaced by the shared risk plan. And so all wages and salaries now attract a 17% payment, and this will continue until March 31, 2028, so an additional 11 years. There is a provision here that if the pension reaches 150% of its open exposure, in other words, its open benefit requirement, that payment could cease early, but we've assessed that as being quite an unlikely event. So we are doing the planning on the basis of that 17% carrying on until 2028. There are a couple of other components here I would just make mention of. The first is shift differential pay, which is received by approximately 92% of the officers. It represents pay for hours that are worked outside the normal, let's say, daily hours of 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. and represents 2.5% of the annual salary. So there is a large portion of the complement that receives that. There is also a statutory holiday payout received by approximately 70% of officers. That's available for members who work the 12-hour shift and obviously would carry over stat holidays in some of those shifts. Therefore, they are compensated for 4 12-hour shifts per year. And then there's a small portion, only 28% of officers who continue to receive long service pay. These would be staff who were hired prior to June 1st, 1997, and they receive a long service pay on a sliding scale depending on the years of service, and it caps out at 3.5% per year. On the fire side, there is also a long service pay, but it is for a larger portion of members. Approximately 47%, nearly half of firefighters receive long service pay. Again, it only applies to those employees who were hired on or before June 1st, 1997. Since then, that long service pay does not apply. So those are the various components that we've tried to represent in terms of compensation. I'll try to represent that as clearly as I can as I go through this. We will start with police services for some of the data. Bit of contract history here. The current police contract expired on December 31st, 2015, so we're coming up on 2 years since we've had a current contract. The police and fire both have legislated no right to strike, therefore their contracts ultimately can end up being resolved through interest arbitration. In the case of police, there has only been one arbitrated settlement in the last 20 years. That was being in 2004. All other contracts within our search in that period of 20 years have been resolved by negotiation. The last contract was settled in April of 2014, just prior to the interest arbitration commencing. Settlement at that time was, because it was into 2014, there was a retroactive settlement of 4.5%, plus a $1,500 payment retro to January of 2013, and then 2 annual increases of 3.75% for 2014 and 15. The contract includes a no layoff clause for current employees. However, for employees that have been hired subsequent to November 2011, there is a layoff provision. In terms of the taxpayer costs, so I want to be clear on some of the terminology. This is not the salary necessarily. This is salary being just one component of total cost to employ any one employee. Salary for a first-class constable in 2015 is $85,519. We apply the 29% to that for a total compensation of $110,320, and of course the special pension payment for that employee brings the total burden or cost to $124,000 and change, just shy of $125,000. If we include some of the other components, like the shift pay and the stat holiday pay that I referred to earlier, the cost for those who receive that at the constable level again would total $130,861. And this table does not include any overtime cost or the long service pay that I alluded to earlier. To give a sense of the trends since 2004, we tried to find a reasonable period of time here. So if we look at the cumulative increases of the police wages relative to the Consumer Price Index, this would be the Canadian Consumer Price Index. I want to stipulate and clarify that's what it is. There are a number of versions of CPI that are published for various local markets. This is the national CPI. Relative to CPI, the cumulative police wage has increased by nearly 46%. CPI has increased by 21% through that period of time. This is not a compounded increase. This is just adding up the increases year over year. If we were to compound them, both of those lines, they would be higher. In fact, I think on the upper line, it would be just in excess of 50% over that period of time. This would be the yearly data. Basically the same data as the previous slide, however, it just shows the 1 year at a time. So you can see on this line, the red line being the increases on the police contracts, all of which I guess would have been settled by negotiation, with the exception of the first one, would be in excess of the CPI, with the exception of the 2011 and 2012 period where the contract was not adjusted. In other words, there was a 0% increase in 2011 and 2012. And then following that, that contract that I just described, there was a 4.5% plus $1,500 increase, which we've simply adjusted to show 6.6%, followed by 2 years at 3.75%. So with the exception of those 2 years, those contract settlements have been in excess of CPI. And then to use the same data, back in 2004, first class constable would have been earning at the base salary level at $56,500. With those cumulative increases today, that same constable is earning $85,500. Had the salaries been increasing by consumer price index, they would be earning $68,000 and change. This is a table, a bit busy, so I'll draw attention to the peak point on headcount. So this would be our overall police peak, would have been in 2009, would have been 200 employees, of which there would have been 165 police association members, and then associated members from police management, the inside workers, the 2 CUPE locals, 486 and 18, and some civilian management. Since that time, so it would have peaked at that time, up to this point in 2017, that total complement has been reduced by 24 positions, and there is an intention in the budget submission for 2018 to reduce 1 more. This data has not been included in any of the tables up to this point in time. It's a total of the overtime costs incurred through the Police Commission by year since 2008, and you can see back in 2008 there was just under $500,000 in overtime wages. That has risen up to just over $700,000 in 2016. I don't currently have the 2017 data, and of course the year is not complete. All we did on this table is take the association members, we took the total overtime amount divided by the number of uniform members to come up with an average overtime earnings. That's in no way to indicate that all members received that. I'm sure there would be many police officers who receive no overtime, and there would be some who would receive in excess of this amount, but this would just be a simple average. This is another way of looking at it, just a separate representation. You can see from 2009 on the sworn establishment, there's been a reduction in the overall headcount by 13%. At the same period of time, the wages have increased by 23%. Another way of looking at this is comparing it to the total budget. So we broke down the wages as a percentage of budget and the goods and services as a percentage of budget. If you look in the 2013 time frame, we were at about an 80-20 ratio, 80% wages, 20% goods and services. That has now shifted to 87% wages and just under 13% goods and services. So the burden is obviously moving towards wages in terms of the overall weighting within the police budget. We did a few projections just to sort of do a bit of prediction as to where this is going. Because we are without a contract currently, we used a couple of scenarios. The upper table is the 2% scenario. So if we applied a 2% increase to the base year, which is 2015, where the base salary is $85,519, added 2% per year right up to 2019, the resultant base salary will be $92,500. We applied the same multiples, so the shift premium, the stat holiday pay, the fringe multiplier at 29%, and come up with a total of $125,000. And if you add in the special pension payment, then the total cost per officer is $141,000 in 2019. Similarly, if you apply a 3% annual increase, we start with the same base at $85,500, add on all the same things, and your resultant salary in year 2019 is $96,200, and a total cost of that position of $147,000. To give a sense of what that means in terms of the overall city budget, we took the basic head count, assumed it would stay stable, applied the 2%, 3%, 4%, and 5% figures to that overall salary cost for the current complement, and you can see that for each year that contract moves up by 2%, the total cost of the contract will increase by nearly $400,000. If the contract increases by 3% per year, the total cost of the contract will increase by nearly $600,000. And of course, this gets added to each year. So if let's say it were a 4-year contract, you can take those numbers and multiply them by 4 in the 4th year. This chart shows a comparison to the other employee groups. It's only a reference point. It's a bit of a busy chart, so I'll try to explain this. We took 3 different groups and compared it to the first-class constable wage rate and started in 2006. And you can see on here that a typical Group 6 inside worker at that point in time, that the police constable was earning 37% more than that inside worker. We applied the annual increases to that QP Local 486 salary all the way along to 2014, and we applied it to the police constable as well, and you can see at the end that they are earning 54% higher than that inside worker. We did the same exercise with the outside worker. You can see that in 2006, the police officer was earning 43% more than an outside worker, and in 2014, they're earning 57% more. We took a middle-level manager. We chose, just as a comparator, a customer service manager. You can see in 2016, that manager was earning 6% more than the police constable. In 2014, the police constable is earning 11% more than that same manager, and that's represented on this graph. This red line represents the police constable salary relative to that manager's salary over that period of time. In terms of the overall budgeted police wages and benefits, I've already talked about a lot of this data, so I'm not going to belabor this one. This does include, however, all positions. It's not just contracted positions or negotiated positions. It's the entire complement. You can see the full police establishment is listed here for each year. 2017, 176 employees. Total wages and benefits through that period of time increased by 31%. That's actually noted up here. There is a bit of a typo here. The right-hand column is the cost per full-time employee, which the title says it increased by 31. In fact, it increased by 45% through that period of time. The only way that was really accomplished is by a reduction in the head count. So the per cost is going up 45. The total wages and benefits are going up by a lesser amount. The reason is we have fewer people providing that service. This is simply to show the total cost of the St. John Police budget. We just simply wanted to point out that if you look up in the public record the approved police budget, you will find these numbers here. It does not include elements that are embedded within the city budget that are continue to be borne by the city. So the special pension payment is shown here. That, in fact, is not in that police budget. The debt for the police station is also not included. That's about $1.5 million per year. And the total cost for police is just shy of $29 million for 2017. You can see actually on this trend that it's relatively flat. It's not seeing these enormous increases. That's really being accomplished by reductions in the goods and services budgets in those years, and some headcount reductions as well. So I'm going to shift gears now and talk a little bit about the fire service. Similar format, maybe a few less slides because some of them were explaining what some of these elements were. The current fire contract expired in December 2014. We're coming up on 3 years without a contract. Again, fire service, when they do not have a right to strike, therefore any negotiated settlements which are unsuccessful end up in interest arbitration. Little different story on the arbitration with fire. You can see that we've had 3 arbitrated settlements going back a little longer period of time here, I guess, back to 1998. And you'll note that the fire establishment was reduced in 2012 by 16 positions, roughly 10%. The last signed contract in 2012 had an adjustment for 2011 of 2%, 2012 of 2%, and then in 2013 and 2014 they received 2% adjustments for a total of 4% in those 2 years. Similar format, cumulative increases relative to CPI going back to 2004 in this case in order to get our 10 years. The cumulative increase, again, not compounded, this is just adding the increases, just shy of 45% on the fire wages, whereas CPI during that period of time was just under 20%. Again, the year-over-year changes, so this is each year now, this is not cumulative, this is just each year independent. You can see that each of those 10 years the fire contract was increased by more than the CPI with the exception of 2011 where CPI was higher than the settlement. At that time it was 2% per year for 2011 and 12. This is the same data again, except instead of percentages, it's the total wage of the firefighter, first-class firefighter would have been earning around 57.5 in 2006. Today is earning 79.7, and that would have been as effective as of 2014. Remember, so 3 years ago, nearly. And had that been increased by consumer price index, that same firefighter would today be earning $66,000. So they have outpaced the CPI over, I guess this is over an 8-year period that's on this particular graph, just to clarify that. This is a very busy slide. I've already mentioned this, but you'll see this one change in the establishment, in the total establishment of fire in 2012 dropped from 161 down to 145. And in the bottom section, we have the holiday relief casual staff who range, between 32 and 27, I guess, 26. It's never not exactly the same every year. Taxpayer cost for a firefighter, similar format again. So just remind you, this is not the salary necessarily that these staff receive, but the total cost of compensation. Again, last contract, 2014, first-class firefighters earning $79,700. With fringe is another 23, brings them up to about $103,000. With the special pension payment, brings it up to $116,000 per year is the cost of one employee in the fire service. And then if we include the other compensation, in this case the long service pay, does apply to about 47%, I believe I recall, of the firefighters. Again, only those who've been hired, were hired prior to 1997 would qualify for this. There's roughly $3,000 there, which brings that total up for the first-class firefighter to about $120,000 of total cost, not total compensation, but total cost. Little different picture on the overtime. You can see here that overtime in the 2011 period for the fire service was around $500,000. That has been reduced each year. In fact, in 2015 it was eliminated, and well, not quite eliminated, but nearly eliminated. There's about $20,000 in the overall budget for the fire service since 2015, and that would be consistent in 2017 as well. Same format of slide. If we look at the overall fire establishment, there was one reduction in 2012, represented about 10%. At the same time, the compensation for that first-class firefighter has increased by 23%. We ran similar scenarios. Again, a reminder to council that our last contract expired 3 years ago. So we would be applying these numbers right up to probably effective, I guess, January 1st of this coming new year. The first table shows a 2% increase year over year in each of those years. We'll take the salary component of the firefighter from $79,700. If they were to receive 2%, they will be earning $86,000 effective 2018. With all of the other costs, that would bring up the total cost burden of a firefighter to $126,000, just shy. If we apply a 3%, obviously you can read those figures, but the total cost again would be $131,000, and the firefighter would be earning $89,700. The total employer cost then, if we apply that to the establishment of all of our firefighters in each of their ranks, so if we go down through here with the head count on each of those positions, applying the current compensation and adding in the 2%, 3, 4, or 5, we get to a total of what this will mean to the city's costs. In each of those years, this would be added. So for each year that they would receive 2%, there would be $350,000 added to the overall cost. And of course, this is cumulative. So if they get 4 years of 2%, in that fourth year, the cost would increase by $1.4 million roughly. Similar table to the one I showed earlier. We did the comparison of a firefighter to the two CUPE groups, 486 and Local 18, the inside and outside workers, as well as that same manager of customer service. And you can see that in 2006, the firefighter was earning 30% more than the inside worker. Today, they're earning 49% more. For the outside worker, they were earning 35% more. Today, they're earning 52% more. In terms of the manager, they would have been earning 11% less than the manager in 2006. Today they're earning 7% more. So they would have crossed this line in 2010 where they went from earning less than that typical manager and now earning more. I'm almost done. This final slide in terms of data is the single slide we have for comparator data. The upper table shows recent basic salary data and some fringe benefit data for the comparator communities of Fredericton and Moncton compared to St. John. The challenge here, of course, is that our contract is effective July 1st, 2014, whereas the other two have had negotiated settlements effective 2016 and another adjustment in 2017. If you look at the base salary, however, our firefighters compare relatively similarly with their current compensation. If we apply a 2% increase effective January 2015 and 16, we result in this $82,900, which would be similar timeframes to Fredericton and Moncton, and this $82,900 would put St. John ahead of both Fredericton and Moncton with 2% increases in that contract, in a hypothetical contract. That's a lot of data. a lot of tables. Thank you for bearing with me here as I tried to rattle through that. We were also asked as part of the resolution to speak to any mitigating types of activities that could be taken, particularly in light of the upcoming budget. We have included a few comments here with respect to probably longer term and some short term things that need to be considered as we move into the next year or two. Start with long term. We have had ongoing activity talking to the provincial government about this binding arbitration system. We feel that the system today has been producing consistently higher results than negotiation. It is obviously very challenging, and the arbitration system is designed to replicate as best it can open and free negotiation and to somehow duplicate what would have been achieved at the bargaining table. Our observation is that it's certainly producing results that are in excess of normal inflation, and in our case, definitely producing results that are in excess of our affordability. We would also recommend that as we get into making decisions around the overall public safety component of the service provision to the city, that we do a proper costing and service standard establishment and communicate that clearly as to what we are getting for the money, and to clarify that. Oftentimes these conversations turn into anecdotal and emotional conversations about what's appropriate, and I think that's normal when we're talking about public safety, but we do need to get this to somehow a data-based decision. We need to look, and I was here, I think, just about 4 weeks ago exactly, talking about tax analysis and following up on our tax fairness analysis, and introducing some ideas and concepts around how property taxation could be done differently. We believe we need to explore how industry participates in public safety costs as well, to ensure that if there are opportunities for cost recovery, that those be fully explored. We have included in here, and I guess it's evident through this data, that previous councils have had to make decisions, very difficult decisions around reduction in headcount. Hopefully it does not come to that sort of a thing, but that has been a measure that's been taken. It occurred to me after we submitted the data that we should have included as well that a couple other options that obviously would not be very compelling would be to raise the tax rate. I think that needs to be on the table at least for consideration, or elimination of other services in order to afford what we're foreseeing here in terms of affordability in this particular area of service. And at that, I'll end my comments. We'll be happy to take any questions. Would remind council, I guess, that we will be entering into the budget process here very shortly, and we'll be starting with that in a week from yesterday, I guess, with a session to discuss the draft budget, where obviously we're going to have to make some difficult decisions around some of these types of elements and other services that will be implicated. So.